Hello, welcome to my channel. I'm today a retired librarian turned homeschool mom, and in this video we're going to look at Roald Dahl's George's Marvellous Medicine. Okay, so first, if you want to know my opinion on how to deal with Dahl and his questionable issues, check out my Dahl intro video. It goes into that a little bit more in depth than Dahl's history and stuff like that. We're going to be looking at this very interesting book. First things first, if you are going to read this to small children, I advise you, please lock up everything in your household that you think your children might get into. Because this book starts off with one little boy, George. His mother goes away. He's 8 years old. He's stuck at home with his very, very nasty grandmother. No, that's not a common theme with Dahl. He has a very nice grandmother in Witches. But nevertheless, this is a woman who's basically more witchy. In fact, he thinks she might be a witch. So basically she yells at him for being a brat and being spoiled, and he's not supposed to grow anymore. He's already too tall. His father's an idiot. His mother's an idiot. And he basically needs to do whatever she says. And at a certain time, she needs this brown goopy medicine, and she makes him get her tea and says 1 sugar. Then she says it's not sweet enough, and then she needs a teaspoon, and again, she's a nasty old hag. So George wants to fix Grandma. So he wants to create her new medicine. So this is what George does, and this is why this book is a slightly frightening if you don't have a safe full of everything that your child could possibly get into. Before you read this book, he takes a large pot, he goes upstairs, he empties everything in the bathroom, from shampoo to his dad's shaving cream. He does mention he likes aerosol cans, soaps, body washes, you name it. Anything that's not in the medicine cabinet goes into this pot. They don't have cleaning products in the bathroom. He then goes into his parents' bedroom and dumps in his mother's makeup, including her lipstick, her perfume, and her face powder and everything, again, including the makeup puff, into the pot. Goes downstairs. Goes out to there's a laundry room, and dumps all sorts of things, including flea powder and shoe polish and laundry soap and all sorts of other stuff into the pot. And yes, a whole bunch of shoe polishing stuff as well. Put some antifreeze, goes into the garage and gets some antifreeze, does that. Go out to the shed. His dad owns a farm. So yes, animal medicines, all sorts of like animal dips and flea dips and hoof cures and stuff into the pot. And then goes back in the house, puts it on the stove, cooks it up. Turns out it's bright purple. He goes outside and adds brown paint to it, cooks it up. Now it's brown. He gives it to Grandma. Now Grandma does not die, despite, all sorts of things, including motor oil again and antifreeze in there, and all sorts of stuff that would probably kill an actual human being, which is why this book is slightly problematic. Basically, he gives it to Grandma, and Grandma's mouth goes on fire. She wants him to call the fire department. He doesn't. And then she grows. So she becomes gigantic and skinny and cranky. He gives it to a chicken. The chicken becomes gigantic. Mom comes home, nearly faints. This is her mother. Grandma's getting mad because nobody's paying attention to her. Dad gets home. First he freaks out, then he realizes, oh, I can make money out of this because the chicken just dropped an egg the size of a football. So he goes around and has George give it to all sorts of his family. And then he runs out of the medicine. So it makes things big. So the next scene is Dad wants him to make more of it, only he doesn't necessarily remember what it is. So they go around the house, finding all the empty bottles, emptying, but getting more. I don't know how on earth they get all of this stuff, because he literally emptied the house of all sorts of things. Dumps it all in. Can't remember everything. Gives it to one of the chickens that basically developed really long legs. Adds something else. Gives it to a chicken. It has a giant long neck. Adds a few things else. Gives it to a chicken and it shrinks. Then Grandma gets mad because they have eventually gotten Grandma out because she grew through the house. And they got a crane and got Grandma out of the house. And then she jumped on the boy's now gigantic pony and ran around being crazy, because that's what she is. And she gets mad and she insists on taking it. She keeps wanting George to get her more tea and is insulting people and being kind of nasty. And then she takes this dose of what they just gave a little bit to the chicken, about, I think they say 50 doses, and and that made this chicken size shrink. Well, it makes Grandma shrink so much she disappears. And then Mom is first slightly upset, and about by lunchtime she doesn't care anymore. And it's like, she was a nasty old woman, now she's gone. And that's the end of this book. So it's interesting. It's definitely a pattern of Roald Dahl's. He had a crappy childhood. Again, if you watch my introductory video, he had a crappy childhood. Adults treated him really badly. He doesn't necessarily have a thing against grandmothers, because in Witches he has a really good grandmother character. So, and that's one of the only other books I'm really very familiar with. But apparently this is a nasty grandmother. He doesn't actually have a thing against women either, because Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, the mother is fine. I don't think, and I don't, obviously in Matilda you have Miss Honey, who is fine, but that's kind of typical of his books. You have one good adult in a bunch of nastiness. And in this book, the mother is fine, besides the fact that she doesn't care that her mother has suddenly completely disappeared. So, this book is interesting. It's funny, it's bizarre, but if you have mischievous children, you might get into trouble. That was my first thought when I read this first part of this book. I'm like, oh dear God. Most parents would go completely nuts if they dumped an entire thing of hairspray and perfume and used all the shampoo and all of Dad's shaving cream and aftershave and antifreeze and oil and paint and flea dip and all sorts of things into a pot and tried to give it to Grandma, because in real life she would die. You would have poisoned her, because antifreeze and motor oil and God knows what else, not to mention all sorts of animal medications. So that's the problematic part. If I would not read this to small mischievous children, at least unless, again, you have all this stuff locked up, and I don't think trying to explain it to them quite work, because until children, or at least from what I've been able to tell of the science, they don't entirely have a conscience until they're like 6, at least according to the science, and they do not have impulse control at all for a very, very long time. They have very hard times with impulse control. So this could be problematic if you really don't have a massive talk with kids. Really little ones will find this very, very funny. But again, if your kids are extremely mischievous, I'd be careful with this book. And if you have an extremely nasty mother or mother-in-law who lives with you, again, I'd be very, very careful with this book. I don't know what I would have done if I actually lived with my father's mother, which was the only living grandmother I knew, and had this situation, because yes, I had a nasty, nasty grandmother who probably would have acted very similar to this, if not slightly worse, because yeah, my grandmother was not a good person. She's passed now. She's not in our lives, thank goodness. But I didn't grow up with her either. We grew up, they were in Florida, we were in Hawaii. I saw her a couple times in my life before I became an adult, and then I really got the brunt of the nastiness, because that's what she was. But nonetheless, I don't know what I would have done around her if I had been a child, and I probably would have gotten the light beaten out of me by my father for doing this kind of thing. So yeah, be careful with that. So this book, it's interesting. Kids will find it funny. If you have like middle schoolers, late elementary, and you trust your kids, and you know they're not that crazy, and you have most things locked up, and go to a full explanation of, no, this would actually kill someone, you're probably fine. It's funny, it's whimsy, it's insane. If you're looking at chemistry, it might be an interesting book, because again, after he makes all this stuff together, he doesn't remember everything, because again, he's an 8-year-old boy, and they keep adding different things, and essentially it doesn't do the same thing, and then eventually makes Grandma disappear. So that is, mind you, that's the slight danger, is it doesn't quite work. But again, he also made Grandma and everything else in his, well, Dad did that. He made Grandma large. Daddy went nuts and decided to make everything else large. I think he made a chicken large first. He made Grandma, and then there was a chicken, and that's why his mother nearly fainted, because she came from the store, and all of a sudden Grandma's through the roof, but she's more concerned about the chicken, and Grandma's pissed off about that. And then there's a whole thing of she disappears, and by lunchtime, Mom agrees that she was a nasty person and she was a nuisance, and they're glad she's gone. So, again, problematic because Dahl is weird. Dahl really would have been very, very good horror writer. Most of his books are just creepy. But again, it's funny. It's whimsical. If you're looking at chemistry, I mean, as I said, you realize that you miss things if you don't add everything in your original concoction. It will do something completely different. Okay, it's making a chicken's legs really large, making its neck really large, making it really small, and then again making Grandma disappear because she takes too much of it, because she's a nasty old woman. But yeah, this is a strange little book. I read this in ebook form, so that's the reason I don't have a physical copy. It's a bizarre little book. It was written, when did Dahl, see if I can actually pull up Marvellous Medicine here on Wikipedia so I know when it was published. Marvellous Medicine came out in 1981. So it looks like it was praised for its humor, but criticized for its undeveloped plot and offbeat ending. Yeah, it's one of Dahl's shorter books, so this is not a long book at all. So, yeah, it doesn't have a plot. This is not a complex book. It's Mom leaves, Grandma's nasty, little boy mixes up a concoction, makes Grandmother giant. Mom comes home, nearly faints because Grandmother chicken. Father comes home, goes crazy, and starts having Daddy sees money in his eyes and starts making everything large. And then the next day, they try to recreate the concoction, and Grandma ends up disappearing. And that's it. That's pretty much the accomplice. That's the entire book. I read it in maybe an hour or two between dealing with my 2-year-old and my husband and multiple cats. So it's not very long. It came out in 1981. It's quirky. It's weird. It's an interesting introduction to Dahl if you're looking for something shorter. But again, massive content warning. Lock up everything. Make sure your kids are very much aware that doing all of this might actually kill someone, and you don't want to spend money replacing things like your makeup and Dad's shaving cream and antifreeze and paint and motor oil and all sorts of other interesting things like soap powder. Keep these things out of the reach of children, really do. Parents obviously were not. This is 1981. Apparently they weren't doing enough child-proofing, but I suppose they. There's one thing that is interesting, that when he goes in the bathroom, his parents have made him promise not to touch anything in the medicine cabinet. And he doesn't, because he made a promise to his parents and he doesn't want to disobey them. They just didn't tell him not to touch absolutely anything and to put it in a pot and give it to Grandma. They also didn't tell him to not to touch the animal medicines. And yes, he has this conversation with himself. Like, they didn't tell me to not do this, so I'm going to do this. So that's the one kind of thing, is maybe you should, it's like, just like George, promise Mom and Dad you don't touch this. Or just lock everything up. Even when you have 8-year-olds, baby-proof like crazy. But again, this is Roald Dahl. This kid has no personality. His parents don't have any personality. That's typical of Dahl's books. He designs them for children to be able to imprint them on there. Either that or he just can't write complex characters that are not terrifying. But again, that's pretty much it. This is the book I chose to do Dahl month. It's a good introduction. I will cover James and the Giant Peach and the film next summer. I will eventually cover Witches. No, I have not seen the new one. I'm not sure that's a book adaptation. It may be an adaptation of the film. And as much as I like Anne Hathaway, she can't compete with Angelica Houston. I'm sorry. Anne Hathaway's a brilliant actress, but Angelica Houston's older, more experienced, and Still doesn't resemble the character, but I will get there. Eventually, I may throw witches in here somewhere, because it's an interesting book in of itself. I will cover more Dahl just because they're classics and they're weird. I can always go for weird. But back to this book. Proceed with caution. I will say that with all Dahl's books. Proceed with caution. With this one particularly, just because of all the things that he does, and the reality is you could kill someone. And technically he makes Grandma disappear, so yeah. This probably would have appealed again if I had lived near my grandmother, because she was not a happy person. She was very, very cruel to her family. But I don't think she took brown medicine. She had an inhaler. She had breathing issues for various reasons, and she was very, very unhealthy. But that is really it for this review. There's not much else to say about George's Marvellous Medicine. It's short, it's weird, it's a good introduction to Dahl, but again, proceed with caution. So, especially if you have a cranky mother-in-law or mother that your children can't stand. Again, common with Dahl's books. So that's really it. If you like this review, like and subscribe. I have a bunch of stuff going on this month, from Harry Potter to Tamora Pierce to some fun regular old videos. I think mostly family stuff going on this month. I have a ton of stuff coming in October, more stuff from more Tamora Pierce to some Native American stuff in November. I have fun Christmas stuff in January. I've done a whole bunch of other book reviews, some film reviews, a sprinkling of traveling stuff, some sprinkling of secular, aka non-religious homeschooling stuff. And yes, I say that because I wasn't always familiar with that word, what secular meant. So I guess non-religious. We're not a religious family. So, and I have a bunch more planned. So if you like what you see, like and subscribe. Thank you.